However, I would like to apologize a little bit more earlier because I can't make it as a co-chair sessions due to have some programs today. Nevertheless, I will continue my presentation today. I do thanks the organizer and Dr. Janet particularly for good remarks starting off our presentation. So this is my name, Dr. Nirwandy, Noordin from Center for Media and Information Warfare Studies. The title of our paper is Importance of Territorial Sovereignty and Good Governance towards Malaysia National Security. So in the introduction, we're going to talk about how the Malaysia is a multiracial federal adopting a democratic administrative system. We have a constitutional king promoting the unity of people, and we have the federal constitution, which is the highest law of the countries. And the Malaysian national security refer to situations that is free from any threat to the country's value, where there is a threat from within or outside the countries. And this is where we're going to focus on looking into the national security context and the importance of territorial sovereignty and good governance towards Malaysian national security. So this is my part. I missed up the parliament just now. And this is some of my area of expertise. Right, to start with, we're going to look into the area of what we call the process of national security governance. So this is basically the structures and the templates of national security governance. As is our nations, we have the institutions of federal constitution. We have the National Security Councils, which looking into National Security Council Act and National Security Council to look into all the elements of security. And then we also have the elements of National Security Council in the Prime Minister Department. So this is a context on how national security governance works. So this is very much important because in the process of understandings and looking into the particular context, we need to know that national security is a part of the elements that is interest the people much. So basically, the idea of the study is to look into the territorial sovereignty and the elements of the good governance and how it is important in national security governance. And the existence of security policy within a country is very important because the federal government plays an important role in protecting it from national security threats by creating a strong defense system inside and outside the country. So nevertheless, in any forms of good constructs of national security policy, it have to have this kind of at least some elements, the fundamental values of security defense system, whether inside and outside the countries. And the national security policy, in the context of our country, it consists some time of effect. So this is called DKN of national security policy in Bahasa Inggeris, in English. And this is the principal policy that looks into all the elements that support the security elements together in the forms of this foundation. So by knowing this context, we also like to see whether the people do understand the Malaysian core values of national security. So before we move into the systematic review, understanding what are the process of the national security policy, we'd just like to know briefly as a part of our study to know what are the people reactions of understanding the core value of Malaysian national security. And this is also been observed as part of a good understanding to start with before we moving into understanding the territorial sovereignty and the good governance in the context of the national security. So in order to do that, we have a very simple exercise, simple research to first look into the public perceptions of the Malaysian core values, which is Malaysian society behavior and demographics of Malaysian society. So this we give an first round of evaluations, understanding what are the process of the Malaysian National Security Council to look into the formal context. And by having that, we expose people to understand the national security pillars of our country's national security elements of policy. So we have 9 metrics, 9 basic elements what should consist as the national security pillars. And I think we have some differences on how our country governance works on the national security. But in the context of Malaysian context, this is very much important. It's called as teras. Teras is in Bahasa Inggeris or English is called as pillars. So the 9 pillars of national security for Malaysia consist of: first, territorial sovereignty and integrity. Second is social political stability. Third is the issues of national security. Fourth, the importance of the good governance. 5 is the economic resilience. 6 is the social justice. 7 is the sustainable developments, 8 is societal security, and 9 is international recognition. So this is the security pillars that we have for our countries and Malaysia. And being one of the security experts in the country, advising some agency and giving some talks on national security, I do believe this is quite fundamental for the people to understand and to have the early perception what do they think about the elements of these pillars of national security before we move into understanding the context of good governance. So the first core talks about the elements of what we call the territorial sovereignty and integrity. So it talks about the sea waters, international law, our rivers, our land, our territorial waters, airspace that form the geographical national countries according with 1970 roadmap document. So this is quite important because we have seen in some of the countries, you know, the war happening now between Ukraine and Russia, China claiming the 10-dash line in South Asian regions. We have some issues of situation conflicts in Myanmar, in our ASEAN countries, and some other issues that have not been settled. So the importance of sovereignty is very much important. And also it's stated under the United Nations Charter, under Article 2, the importance of sovereignty of any other countries. And Morrison in 2014 maintained that in order to maintain the security, stability, and sovereignty, the country borders must be maintained look into all the elements. It includes economic sources, strategic principle, and have to be guided by the borders. And by limiting their crimes to the borders, each country can protect the survival of the sovereignty. So the main interest of sovereignty is, of course, the understandings of the borders, whether it's aviation, it's maritimes, whether it's on the trade, social, or any forms of activities that move into that forms of the context. And the good governance, the pillars number 4, talks about important core because it involves not only the government sector, but even the public sector. It talks about high integrity, no corruption issue, honesty, trustworthy, fair, equitable, transparent, responsible. And this is some of the elements that need to be understood as part of these 2 pillars. So by looking to these 2 pillars, territorial sovereignty and the good governance in the Malaysian national security pillars under the Malaysian National Security Council, we like to see some public response on how they understand this part before moving on into the depth and the importance of these 2 towards the national security. So this factor is important to look into the level management of whether good or bad is based on the quality of facts and how the administrative system works. So the first methodology is to look into the public response. We use a survey before we move into the systematic review by using a narrative and descriptive, which is not fully called as a facilitative review, but to understand the core theme, the element that should be formed, the findings and the discussions important of territorial integrity and good governance. And we have this sampling all across Malaysia, particularly the town around Kuala Lumpur, the capital city, just to have some initial understanding what are the elements of that. So you could see the proportion here, and all the listed are what we call in the Klang Valley, which is one of the elements closest to the capital city of Malaysia, which is Kuala Lumpur. And this is some of the questions asked to the participant, which is a way whether I'm confident the government effort in addressing complex social problems, whether they are confident in the government's carrying out transparent government policies, whether the government is successful in applying the latest knowledge, and whether the government is trying to reduce the bureaucracy and so on. And by looking to that particular question, you could see that all the correlations are quite interrelated, where the public's behavior and public interest. So we could see all the positive correlation, but highest is the ascending of international recognitions. And the territorial sovereignty remains as the part of the second element that public feel very muchly importance and understanding of that correlation between the national security, the public behavior, and number 6 on the good governance. So we're going to focus on the first and the 6th. And looking to the Cronbach Alpha by the independent variable and dependent variable, you could see the interrelation is quite close, meaning that the society behavior is all interrelated into these 9 constructs of national security pillars. So this is quite a good positive finds to show that it is important, it's all interrelated, and the public do find the correlation exists. So by having that finding, we move into the second context of our research by looking into all the narrative, descriptive, systematic review to understand the policy statements of National Security Council, the national security philosophy, the national security pillars, to understand the element of comprehensive security, the metrics, issues, challenges, of threats, and the strategy on safeguarding national security pillars, national security index, and to look into how to conclude the systematic research review. And upon our finding, we showed that the general understanding of territorial sovereignty and good governance have also to be understood by looking at the perspective by the timeline. So I'm not sure how is the country's or your national security perspective look into, but in the context of our research, it looked at it is important to understand on how the changes elements, the changes patterns of the national security, for example, the global terrorism affected the territorial sovereignty and good governance, the overlapping of cyber security and the maritime airspace, for example, the illegal immigrants and how illegal immigrants could become a core component of understanding the good governance to the national security, which of course under the pillars, four core pillars under the National Security Council. So this is some of the overview of the findings looking into the context by looking into the yearly elements, the process of looking into these participations, these particular issues, and looking into this particular process of understanding. So this is important for the national security in order to understanding the importance on how to construct a good territorial sovereignty and good governance. You have to look into the historical part, the overview on how it moved into a new forms of threats, people understanding, and people appreciations of good governance. It is based on the constructs of territorial sovereignties and on the good governance. For example, we talked about the integrity could become one of the threat to national security because it talks about the people can use some elements of, for example, bribery to go to the border, some element of bribery to sell some secrets of nation, some element of integrity to make sure that they're dark reform, and of course reflectors of the cyber security. And the cyber security also talk about territorial sovereignty. We talk about the competence of all the state power nations, the private military company that have all the power to overlaps and to do some negative intrusions, particularly through the cyber security, as what have been happens in some cases around the world by some states, non-state powers, and of course public military company. All right, and by looking into that, we also managed to look into that the importance of understanding the DIME concept, which is diplomatics, information, military, and economy, as also part of the foundation to understand why good governance and the territorial sovereignty must be interrelated as a part of an important core components in understanding and developing the national security policy. And of course, the second one talks about digital asymmetrical environments and cyber warfare, where we do not know who our enemy are. And this also becoming a form of threat of the territorial sovereignty and of course the good governance, because they can introduce and they can develop, in fact, they can get the problem to the country by launching a cyber warfare. And of course, it also related to the human security, which of course coined by Mahbub al-Haq in 1994, and of course been gazetted under United Nations Resolution 66290. It talks about the importance of the people, the importance of the securities of the people, which is include 7 components, among is political security, individual, community, health security. So it needs a forms of good governance in order for the government to protect its people in the context of human security under the United Nations, which also been put under the OCA, Office Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. And territorial sovereignty also talks about the importance of intelligent context, whether it's territorial security and good governance, and have lots of fronts and domain. And some of the front domains are traditional and some are non-traditional. The traditional, you could look into the maritime aviations, you could look into the physical threats, but when it talks about the non-traditional, it could be the ideological parts of territorial and sovereignty. By putting up the elements, and the people thought that they can be suppressed and they can have not equal right into some forms of extent and some forms of elements. Right. Okay, let's move on. So then we move into the last part, into the context of my presentations. And by looking to that, we could summarize that people looks good, people key to know what are the core pillars of the national security policy, the 9 strong pillars. But in the context of good governance, as far as this research is concerned, and the territorial integrity, people want to know, and the good governance and territorial sovereignty have also must emphasize in the 2 common threats that we face today, which is the state and the non-state actor. So the state actor could be some from the superpower nations, from the surroundings nations, it could be by regional elements. And I think we are quite blessed in the ASEAN context, 11 ASEAN countries. Normally, we do not interfere with each other form of policy. So this is becoming one of the contexts that we have into looking into that. But we have also to look into some form of element. For example, the 9-10 dash line claim by China, looking up into the elements territorial that involve the Sabah and Sarawak elements policies around the Borneo Ocean and the China Sea. And we have lots of things to look into that, particularly in the balance of the superpower, including the conflict that we have today between the Russia and Ukraine, that might change the stability and geopolitical strategies on developing nations of that elements that happens. And this is also goes into the ASEAN, Asia, and the global security countries. And we have, of course, we have the non-state actor. We have the threat from the IS. We have the threat from the Western space supremacy, and we also know what happens under the use of the component of the non-state actor. Particularly now, people can launch a cyber warfare. People can launch the ideological threats, and these require a good territorial sovereignty and good governance elements to be blended to protect the element. And this is what we call the needs to have a comprehensive security in the context of territorial sovereignty, and of course in the context that we call the good governance. And the governance and security must work in hand. We need to have like public, civilians, and intelligence to participate and to become close alliance and networks, academics, advising on the security policy, to look into the particular parts, to reduce the elements of bureaucracy, to reduce the elements of briberies that could dampen some elements of governance situations and process, to ensure that at least for academic to move on into developing a new form of security, for example, a sensor in the border, to look into the involvement of new software, particularly to look into people and to look into all the policies and the index to be achieved in the government standards for it to reach a certain form of good governance. And of course, we need to have a blueprint of national security and national security policy, bring it out and table it out. And this blueprint have to emphasize on good governance blueprints, territorial sovereignty blueprints, academics achievement blueprints, economic blueprint, and of course the health security blueprints in the context that we need to know today. And the important parts of territorial sovereignty and good governance also have to have a proper concept. So we have to be based on proper concepts, like how Dr. Janet have just presented it now. It talked about some concepts of towards things. It looks at that, but it have to be structured and it have to be operationalized. So this is the needs of the participant by the academics, people, to perform a concept of security, which talks about territorial sovereignty, and they have a structures of that, which include the agencies and the people participation, but it has to be operationalized. So this become one of the main contexts of discussion that is being used in the research qualitatively and thematically discussed in order to get some brief understanding of what we have research is all about. And this is how the metrics should look like, and some of the documents have been reviewed in understanding the pillars of the national security, of the good governance and territorial sovereignty. And this is some of the references. With that, I thank you very much, and I do believe that we could work some things in looking into some good research, particularly on the securities. You can reach me in my context here if you have some things. Of course, you can ask the email from the organizer. I'm sorry I didn't put up my email here, but you can always look up into my Twitter or my simple webs, and you can always contact me anytime. So feel free to have a good networks, and thank you again, organizer, and thank you very much, Dr. Janet, for a good sharing session today. I leave it to you.
Thank you so much.